Before Argos or Mr. Plant or The Void, I had a series called Mark and Friends. Mark and Friends is what I consider to be my first real web series on the internet, and I am still proud of it to this day. By the way, I'm Asher and welcome to my channel. Over the years, Mark and Friends has gotten lots of fan art, lots of fan interactions, and a lot of questions about the lore. So I thought today would be a good day to dive into that and tell you the full story of the lore through a PowerPoint presentation. Now before we jump right into the lore, I figure we need a little background refresher on the series as a whole. I actually had to rewatch the entire series just to figure out all the little lore clues I had left behind because I had forgotten all of them. Because I remembered so little of the details that went into this story, I actually felt like an audience member figuring out the lore for myself for the first time. Now Mark and Friends came to me at a very interesting point in my online career. I had been doing POVs almost exclusively to that point, which meant I wasn't actually doing any talking on my own, and I really wanted to break out and do a series that felt a little bit more like it was acting. At this time I also reread Candle Cove, which is a creepypasta about a TV show for children with marionette pirates that only comes on at night that's super scary. And I kind of thought I wanted to do a cursed kids show of my own. So I came up with the story of a puppet that gets kidnapped and is forced to be in a Sesame Street type show with a human host. Mark and Friends officially started way back in 2021, if you can believe it. It actually came out on July 19th, 2021. That feels like so long ago and also not very long ago at all. I mean, this looks like almost a completely different person. The biggest inspiration was obviously old VHS scary kids show creepypastas, but other inspirations were things like Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, and I was also very inspired by Sesame Street itself. People often ask me if Amanda the Adventurer was one of my inspirations, and Amanda the Adventurer actually hadn't come out yet. It can't have been an inspiration because it didn't exist at the time. This series actually had 21 episodes, which for me was a lot because at the time I was doing series that had maybe 5 or 6 episodes in them, and usually by the end everyone dropped out. At this point I was pretty much just doing standalones, and my biggest worry about creating a series was what happens when someone comes along and views your video but doesn't know the rest of the story. Can they still have a fun time with it? Because of this, I did a different theme for each episode, ranging from birthday all the way until positivity. My favorite episode was the rainy day episode. I absolutely love that one, and I'm pretty sure at the time it was actually raining, which was super duper cool. Now I was really in my Hello Neighbor era at this point. I wanted as much hidden story and lore as possible, and it absolutely drove me insane, but at the same time it was incredibly fun making it. My main form of lore was through newspapers. The host of the TV show Mark and Friends collects newspapers that he puts on his back wall, and they have little clues that hint to both the major story happening, the backstory of what happens, the past, the present, the future, well, not the future, but the past and the present, just all sorts of stuff. And through these newspapers you can get, I would say, about 60% of the story. I also had a lot of drawings that help tell the story as well. This drawing actually is from a bedtime story that the host reads Mark in one of the episodes, and the bedtime story actually reflects what is actually going on in Mark's life. This way I could tell stories and add even more lore through metaphor and through similar things happening, just through little hints that would help people formulate their own theories and their own ideas of what the backstory was. The third section and the third way I dropped lore, I just named Other because I didn't really know what else to call this, but this was anything else that had any other hidden messages. And now I think it's time for the complete lore of Mark and Friends. But first, a trigger warning. Obviously it's YouTube, so I'm not going into all the little gory details or anything, but just know that a lot of bad stuff happens to kids. You know, the whole series is not exactly funny or upbeat as a whole and deals with a lot of very serious topics such as kidnapping, so just be aware of that. Obviously, I think my audience is pretty used to seeing horror and spooky and weird stuff, so I'm sure most of you guys are going to be okay with this, but just in case someone who isn't grooving with this comes along this section, here's your official warning. Now, the story of Mark and Friends does not begin when you think in 1997 when the first episode is filmed, but actually starts in 1984. It's June of 1984, and the biggest A-lister in Hollywood is Big Monster. He's this orange guy right here. Big Monster is bigger than Adam Sandler. He is bigger than Ryan Gosling. He is bigger than Timothée Chalamet. He was the star of a super successful sitcom, and now he's an A-lister and he gets to make whatever movie he wants. And he wants to make a movie called My Dear Monster about the relationship between a child and his pet monster, played by Big Monster. Now the Hollywood studios are wondering, who do we get to play the role of the child? Who can we find to act opposite Big Monster? And after a huge open call and tons and tons and tons of auditions, they finally find Billy Hendricks. Billy Hendricks is always wearing the same colored shirt, and there's no really good drawing of him throughout the series, so this was the best one I could find behind Mark's head. How I would describe Billy Hendricks is he's that one child actor that was in your acting class when you were a kid that ended up getting signed with an agent and got a whole bunch of commercials while you were stuck doing community theater and struggling to play ensemble parts. That kind of child actor. He's super professional and he makes a ton of money, and he's actually been in a bunch of commercials before, but this is going to be his first breakout role, and he forms a very close bond with Big Monster. I would describe Big Monster as being that type of celebrity that parents would trust their kids around. He stars in many family-friendly films. However, behind closed doors, he's actually not as jolly and family-friendly as he seems. Big Monster has a habit of befriending children and then convincing them to go with him into the sewer to do dangerous things. I mean, it's even implied that Big Monster eats children. Big Monster is incredibly dangerous, and he manages to convince Billy to bring his friends into the sewers. So Billy ends up befriending children in school. He's incredibly popular because, of course, he's been in a bunch of commercials and he's about to be in a movie with a Hollywood A-lister. And so it's very easy for him to befriend kids and tell them, hey, wanna go meet Big Monster? Word gets out about Big Monster being a little creepy. A lot of kids tell their parents, a big article comes out, and My Dear Monster is canceled. One of the kids is named Johnny Hackett, and he is the son of one of Billy's best friends, who isn't given a name in the series, but I'm gonna name Matt. Now Matt is Billy's age, but Johnny is significantly younger than both of them at just 6 years old, and Billy manages to convince both of them to go into the sewers. Unfortunately, later that night, only Matt comes back. By the way, right here is the only image of Johnny throughout the series, and it's in one of my favorite posters of Johnny with Big Monster. Now there is a huge police search to try to find Johnny. Everyone is looking. His parents are distraught. Everyone wants to know what happened to this child. And while this is going on, Big Monster is convicted and sent to prison for 20 years for kidnapping. Those charges are the result of him taking those kids into the sewer. However, things get a lot darker when on July 3rd, police find Johnny's remains in that sewer. Now this is going to cause a huge stir across the world. Imagine if an A-list celebrity was accused of ending the life of a child. Now Big Monster is already in prison, so he feels like he gets to escape the mob and the paparazzi, but unfortunately, that's not what he has to worry about. Because in the same cell as Big Monster is Tim Flowers, who has been sentenced to prison for first-degree murder. Tim Flowers decides to avenge Johnny and ends Big Monster's life, claiming that he did it to avenge Johnny's death. That is the end of Big Monster. Now I bet you're wondering, what about Billy? Believe me, everyone was. Billy's mom decided to take him out of the spotlight and away from the crowds after such a traumatic experience, and this was completely against Billy's wishes. He wanted to continue to be a star, and he wanted to continue to be in movies, but after this horrific accident, his mom decided to lay low. And this brings us to two events that occur over the next few years, between 1985 and 1987. Now, as Big Monster becomes less and less popular, Big Monster's cousin decides that she is going to change her name to remove any association with Big Monster. By the way, look at this face. Remember it. And then just 2 years later, our lead character, our hero, Mark, is born. Now, calculating Mark's age was actually a little bit tricky, but I did manage to figure it out. I had to go through all the videos to try to figure out where I hit it. I ended up figuring out what Mark's age was in the career day episode because in that episode, the host says that it's only 2,169 days before Mark can work a job. And in that same episode, the host says that the legal working age there is 16. Now, I simply divided that number by 364 and I got shy of 6 years, which makes sense because Mark's birthday was pretty recently, which means Mark is 10 years old and was born in 1987. Between 1987 and 1997, Mark grows up. Now, I wish I could say Mark's home life was smooth sailing, but unfortunately, it was not. Mark's parents constantly fought, his dad was constantly yelling, and his mom really didn't do much to help growing up. Because of this, Mark felt an extreme separation between his parents, and he connected a lot more with his grandmother and other family members of his. And this brings us to 1997. It is July 18th, 1997, and Mark is living in Illinois with his parents. Unfortunately, because of the neglect, he decides that he needs to run away. He runs all the way to the park, and there he encounters an ice cream man. Now, Mark is a little confused because this ice cream man looks awfully familiar, and Mark does not know where he had seen him. What Mark doesn't realize, though, is the reason why the ice cream man feels so familiar is because he's Billy Hendrix. Now, remember when I told you to pay attention to Big Monster's cousin? If you didn't notice earlier, Big Monster's cousin and Mark's mother are the same person. And Billy knows this because despite Mark's mother changing her name, Billy has still been tracking down the members of Big Monster's family to see what they're up to, still obsessed with the childhood dream that he lost out on. And when he kidnaps Mark, he realizes he has the chance to recreate that childhood dream of starring in My Dear Monster by starring in a TV series with Big Monster's family member, Mark. And thus, between July 19th and July 24th, the first episode of Mark and Friends is filmed in Minnesota on Mark's birthday. Now, if I'm honest, when I initially created this series, I made it so Mark's birthday was July 19th, but at the same time, it makes no sense to me that Mark would be kidnapped one day and then the very next day film the first episode of the show. Like, I love to perform, but like, even I cannot imagine doing that. Now, Mark's birthday is not a typical birthday because he's spending it in captivity, and he doesn't get a typical birthday present either, because what he receives is his parents' heads in a box. The friendship episode happens not long after this episode, and in that episode we're introduced to Mark's two friends, Donovan, who is an orange cat, and Cupcake Monster, who is a cupcake monster. Now, if you remember, I said Mark was close with other family members of his that weren't his parents, specifically his grandmother, whose name is Grandma Fuzz. And on July 25th, 1997, Grandma Fuzz realizes that the same person that murdered her daughter also kidnapped her grandson. There's also a scene in Mark and Friends where Mark and Billy just keep getting phone calls and the phone keeps ringing, and this is actually Grandma Fuzz, who has figured out Billy's landline and is just calling it to try to get her grandson back. It is now August 1st, 1997. Billy has been working really hard to try to kidnap Mark's friends to join the TV show, but unlike Mark, they're a little bit harder to find. But finally, after a lot of effort, Billy manages to kidnap Mark's friends, Donovan and Cupcake Monster, on August 1st, 1997. Billy had been talking about kidnapping Donovan and Cupcake Monster for so long that what finally clued my audience in to the fact that he had actually done it was that hangman that said, "I have your friends," that I talked about earlier. Doing hidden messages like this is just like, ugh. Now, unfortunately, Billy's reign of terror continues, and on August 10th, Mark's kidney is found on the black market. Luckily, at this point, Mark is still alive, so Grandma Fuzz has nothing to worry about. She just doesn't know that yet. Now, right after this, Donovan is rescued. Unfortunately, however, Billy always kept a mask on while he was around Donovan, so he doesn't know what Billy looks like, but he does know where his hideout is. Because of this, Billy and Mark are forced to relocate to Indiana using the money from Mark's kidney. Because Billy and Mark are moving to Indiana, Billy needs to figure out what to do with Cupcake Monster, and on August 20th, Cupcake Monster's parents receive his body, but not his head. Some of Mark's fur is also found with the body, and this causes Grandma Fuzz to have a lot more hope, because this is 10 days after the kidney was found, which means there is a chance that Mark is still alive. Now, both of Mark's friends are out of Billy's clutches, just in very different ways. But unfortunately, one night, Mark eats a cupcake and realizes he is eating his friend's head. Yeah, and unfortunately, things are not looking very good for Mark. Now on the 26th, the police manage to figure out where Mark and Billy have gone and continue to track him, but at this point, unfortunately lose the scent. On September 15th, the police give up, but Grandma Fuzz decides that she is going to continue and she is going to find Mark on her own. Most of the episodes of Mark and Friends don't have super specific canon dates. A lot of them you could say the canon date is the date they're posted on my TikTok, which would make a lot of sense, but there is one video that has a very specific canon date, and that is the Circle of Life video. This video begins filming on September 17th and ends filming on September 24th. Due to the kidney and Cupcake Monster's body, Donovan thinks that both his friends are no longer with him, and because of that, he starts a charity in their honor. Now, Billy is convinced that the police are onto him, and he is terrified. He knows that he needs to figure a way out, and he needs to figure out a way fast, and that includes getting rid of the evidence, including Mark. This is Mark's last chance. In the episode where Mark goes to the doctor, there is a seeing eye board that says Mark has one more week before I kill him. It's go time, and Mark has to figure out whether or not he's going to escape or whether or not this is where his life ends. The end of Mark and Friends. On November 11th, 1997, Mark kills Billy with a hammer in Michigan. Mark is reunited with his grandmother, and the Mark and Friends tapes are found at the scene of the crime. And that is the complete lore of Mark and Friends. I do have some final thoughts though. What I was trying to tell with Mark and Friends was a story of a cycle of exploitation. Billy is a child actor, which is already a career path that is very often taken advantage of, and he is taken advantage of by his co-star, who is an A-list Hollywood celebrity who takes advantage of him and of other children. Billy then grows up to be a person who exploits and takes advantage of a child himself. I'm very glad it had a happy ending and I'm able to use Mark in the current series, The World of Mr. Plant. Although what I will say is I do believe that the Mark that is in The Void is a grown-up version of Mark and not a 10-year-old version. I've actually been thinking about doing an episode set in the world of Mr. Plant that is featured around Mark. I've been thinking about it, it might be fun. But anyways, ultimately I think I'm really proud of this series. I think it took me to a whole new level, and I don't think the world of Mr. Plant could be where it is if it wasn't for this series helping me lay the groundwork and figure out new ways to express my creativity and to create my work. Thank you guys so much for watching. It really means the world to me. I am so thrilled and happy that I continue to get to create stories for you, and more videos are coming. Please subscribe if you haven't and like the video, and go comment down below and tell me who your favorite character in Mark and Friends was. Sending love to all of you, and I'll see you in the next one.